So thank you again for joining us. I want to take a moment to introduce you to our guest speaker today. We have the honor of having Tarik Daniels with us. Tarik is the founder and executive director of What's in the Mirror. He's also the clinic manager for the Center for Health Empowerment. What's in the Mirror is a healing justice social movement providing mental health awareness to people of color. So I'll like to go ahead and pass it on to you, Tarik.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I hope everyone is well this morning. So I want to start off by saying good morning to everyone. I hope everyone is comfortable. Drink your water, your coffee, your snacks. Again, I know the strain of Zoom meetings and Zoom calls and having to be present in this um, the new normal of 2020. So I just want to make sure you guys are taking care of yourselves and doing all the things you need to do. Like Christopher said, my name is Tarik Daniels. I am the executive director of What's in the Mirror, as well as the clinical manager for the Che clinics here in Austin, Texas. I like to consider myself an Afro-queer artist and activist, a person living with HIV. I write plays, direct plays, as well as an author. So of course, if you wanted to know a little bit more about my creative side, you could definitely go to my website at mrtelltales.com. And so today's presentation is titled Art, Healing Justice, and HIV. So let's get into it. And bear with me, this is my probably second Zoom, and then like all you guys' faces is over the words, but what at the end of this presentation, the participants will be able to understand healing justice and how it can heal at the intersection of HIV through art, outline the mental impact of society and navigating the world as a queer person of color, as well as the concept of social depression, and review how cultural, systematic, historical, and institutional, what's that last word, disparities impact Black queer persons' quality of life. So before we really get into it, I do want to take the time to introduce the feelings wheel to you guys. I'm pretty sure maybe some of you guys have participated in this wheel. And before I'm gonna blow it up, because I know it's kind of small here, so I want to just talk about it a little bit and take a moment to get in touch. I would like you guys to consider the unconscious bias, the isms that is within all of us. So instead of asking the question, am I racist, am I sexist, or am I transphobic, ask the question, where is the transphobia, racism, and sexism I've learned showing up in my life against others, groups that I belong to, as well as myself. And so I'm going to kind of exit out the presentation so I can blow up the feelings wheel. Give me one moment. And so what I want you guys to do next is take a look at the feelings wheel. And in the chat box, I want you guys to take a look at the wheel and let's just see where we are this morning. I do believe that how we're feeling kind of definitely influence how we receive information, how we receive what has been said, how we interpret what's being said. And your feeling is not a bad thing, right? If you have a bad feeling, that's okay. But then you are aware of that. So if you're upset this morning, that's okay, as long as you're aware of that. If you're happy, you're sad, whatever the feeling may be, there is no wrong answer. So I want to give you guys a few minutes to go over the wheel. As you can see, we have in the middle of the circle is like the basic six, sad, mad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful. But as you go through the circle, you see it expands and give you other options to name those feelings.
Hey,
So
Tarik,
through the, yes?
we're still looking at your presentation. I think you might need to stop share and then start a new share with the wheel.
Okay. See, that's a good thing. So let me see, screen share.
There we go.
Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay. So now it's bigger. And so in the chat box, if you can start again, you can see the middle where the 6 basic kind of feelings that most, humans have, and then you can see where you can expand. So for the next minute, look over the list and put it in the chat box, and so we can all know where we are in this space. This is a brave space. I can't guarantee you guys a safe space, but definitely a brave space that we can honor all feelings in this moment. So go ahead with that in about a minute. And you can have multiple feelings as well. Okay. Probably 20 more seconds for everyone to review the feelings wheel and kind of acknowledge where we are this morning. So often we don't just take the time to acknowledge our feelings. Okay. Okay. And so definitely look through the chat box. Everyone in the call, um, acknowledge other people's feeling, take it in, and then let's move forward. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can go back to the presentation. So, okay. Okay, so I definitely wanted to start off, as you guys know what's going on in the world and the country today, and I wanted to start off, we've been through our feelings and we acknowledge our different isms that we might have internally that we might not be aware of, but definitely, as a Black queer person living with HIV, I definitely wanted to start off this presentation with a declaration from my organization around Black Lives Matter. I'm going to read it. The recent events surrounding the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor have raised strong emotions and deep concern about the issues of injustice and social inequalities and racism. We understand that this is a painful time, particularly for the Black community and to everyone who values the dignity of every human life, regardless of color or creed. These events remind us that the elements of injustice and racism continue to exist in our society at large and most probably around us. As an organization rooted in core values of compassion and respect for all people, we want our staff, trainees, and faculty to know that we see, hear, and feel your pain. We are in this together. While words and emotions may be abound at this time, at a time like this, we want to ensure that these words are translated into actions that produce meaningful change to make our institution a more welcoming place for everyone, every marginalized group, and every race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and social economic background. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so I just wanted to take the time to acknowledge that this morning. And so as we start, art and the idea of a history of anti-Blackness and anti-queerness has been really rooted in America for decades and decades. Right now, at this moment when I was approached by Achieving Together to do this presentation, I'm currently reading a book titled Evidence of Being, the Black Gay Culture Renaissance, and the Politics of Violence by Dr. Darius Bose. And if you don't know about that book, you guys could definitely take a read. I feel like it was very important to open up the conversation with this, because as I'm reading the book, a lot what's going on in the book is really setting the tone for the kind of work that Western America is doing around HIV and the intersex of art. In Evidence of Being, it opens up on a grim scene. You know, Washington, D.C.'s gay Black community in the 1980s, ravaged by the AIDS, the crack epidemic, and a series of unsolved murders seemingly abandoned by the government and mainstream culture. Yet in the darkest of moments, a new vision of community and hope managed to emerge. Darius Bose's account of the media, the poetry, and performance for this time and place revealed a stunning confluence of activism and art. In Washington and New York in the 80s and the 90s, gay Black men bounded together using creative expression as a tool to challenge the widespread views that marked them as unworthy of grief. They created art that enriched and reimagined their lives in the face of pain and neglect, while at the same time forging a path towards bold new modes of existence. And at once corrective to the predominantly white male accounts of the AIDS crisis and an open-hearted depiction of the possibility of the Black gay life. And so when you read this book, he's really going in around the kind of the origins around what we call healing justice. The Black queer men in the 70s and the 80s during the AIDS epidemic were believed that their lives didn't matter, right? They were dying at, incredible rates, and they were kind of being erased, as they say in this book, in mainstream media. So they decided that, hey, we have to create art. We have to leave a legacy. We're not just going to die of AIDS and no one knows our story. And so when we think about the Harlem Renaissance back in the 60s, which was heavily influenced around Black queer art, that was kind of, history rewrote it as, just the Harlem Renaissance. And it's very, few mention around the Black queer experience during the Harlem Renaissance. You fast forward it to the 70s and the 80s as a response to, out of the 70s, where it was just the 60s and the 70s was the civil rights era. Then in reaction to that, in the 80s, we had the Christian movement, right? We had the, say no to drugs movement. We had the gang movement. So we had this threat from the government, and then we had the AIDS crisis. And they, again, established a second renaissance of art to preserve their stories, to tell their stories. And so often we don't talk about it. And this book really shapes that. And so if you guys definitely get a chance, definitely read this book. But it also, again, is taking me to where we talk about healing justice. We had people like these artists, the unsung heroes of the 80s and the early 90s, but it also birthed the Black feminist movement, which led us to the healing justice movement, which is kind of all birthed around the same time. So this is an example how history has already proven that preserving art, or how art can impact and continue the legacy of those who are most impacted by HIV. And again, if you have any questions in the chat box, let me know. So what is healing justice? I get that question all the time. And I'm telling you guys today, there is no one answer, right? Like, as you can see, I have on this screen, I have quite a few different person's definition of what healing justice is. And hopefully by the end of this, I can just give you guys the basics of it, and you can really do your research and then really find out what healing justice means to you. Because I don't think there will ever be just one definition. But let's take a few examples that we have. We could look at healing justice as a movement and a term that was created by queer and trans people of color, and in particularly Black and brown films. And I can't see the rest of this, disabled and Southern rural healers. The sharing bar is blocking some of it. Okay, and then what we have here, the healing justice identifies how we can holistically respond to and intervene on generational trauma and violence, and to bring collective practices that can impact and transform the consequences of oppressions on our bodies, hearts, and mind. And that's by Kara Page and the Kendrick Healing Collective. Then we have a quote from Yolo Akili Robinson from Beam. If you guys are not familiar with Beam, they're doing a lot of work around the intersectionality of mental health and HIV as well out in LA. But healing justice is a harm reduction and healing work that integrates the dismantling of transphobia, ableism, racism, and all forms of oppression as part of the healing process. And of course, we have the Prentice Hemphill. Healing justice is an active intervention that transforms the lived experience of Blackness in our world. And so, why do I use healing justice? Well, I do believe that as a person in HIV prevention work and a person that in HIV advocacy work and here at the clinic, one of the pieces that we so often miss is really tackling the isms around HIV. We're so focused on HIV, which we should be, but let's tackle the reason why communities of Blacks are the most impacted by HIV. And so beyond just that, what does that look like? What is transphobia to the trans community and the Black trans experience? What is ableism to the disabled community and their experiences, and racism? And then maybe we can start finding new ways of looking at HIV. So I definitely feel like healing justice opens up the idea that we look at the oppression of the communities that are most impacted by HIV. And it also opens up this idea that HIV work is not a singular task. This has to be a community effort. We look at the Harlem Renaissance and the preservation of Black people in the 20s and how that experience has determined what Black art has looked like for almost the last 100 years. We look at the unsung heroes and stories from the artists out of the AIDS epidemic and how that was able to cultivate this, this culture that we're now being able to see. For so long, it's been hidden, but it's there, right? Exit Henfield, Marlon Riggs, Audre Lorde. We have all this work that has addressed HIV from an art standpoint, and most of it is not mainstream, right? And that's the point, to really start thinking about healing justice within HIV and art, and really continuing the legacy of community work. Because it's not, we can't do it by ourselves. It amplifies what we do as a community. So this is just a little slide from Beam. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it. And it really kind of goes over the different forms of justice and where each lies. And if you can see that healing justice is somewhere in the middle of reparative justice, and it's also on the outskirts of transformative justice. So when we think about transformative justice as a whole, it is the active processes and guidelines and policies and practices that transform the root cause of inequalities within systems and recreate life affirming, healing, emotional justice centric conditions. So again, the root cause. So when we talk about HIV disparities, what are the root cause? Are we talking about racism? Are we talking about homophobia? Are we talking about transphobia? That's the conversations when we talk about disparities, right? And then we look in the middle, we got reparative justice, and it's the same thing, the idea that the individual and societal and institutional injustices that the systems have created and institutions have created. And then we go to healing justice, right? The creation of and restructuring of community traditions. So we talk about the Harlem Renaissance, right? That's a community tradition. We're talking about the art revolution in the AIDS crisis. That was community traditions, and spaces and neighborhoods into places that affirm, support, heal, and sustain the emotional lives of community members based on the legacy of harm and untreated trauma. And HIV disparity is a legacy of harm and treated trauma. And so again, these are all these ideas as why healing justice is an appropriate approach when we talk about HIV stigma and HIV prevention. And I don't know if we're using a chat box, but let me know, Christopher, if anyone has any questions as I go on in the chat box, just feel free to stop me. I know it's a lot of information. And I'll try to like look at this share screen, the chat box and everything. So just keep me on my toes if anyone has it.
Yeah, no worries. There's no questions yet, but definitely if you do have questions, feel free to type them, send them our way, and we'll be sure to get those addressed.
Okay. And so right now, as we see, we're shaping this frame. Why is healing justice important? Why do we look at healing justice when we're talking about HIV and art? And so Kara Page, she is considered like the grandmother of the healing justice movement. Again, if we look at the timeline, when we talk about the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, and we talk about, you know, the Black Power movement in the 60s and the civil rights in the 70s, and we're in the 80s, and we're talking about the Reagan administration. We're talking about, you know, the AIDS crisis, and we're talking about Black queer women and lesbians and feminists and trans people trying to find a way to survive, you know, and they're coming together in communities. Healing justice groups are forming all over the country, right? And Kara Page is, again, considered the grandmother of it. And this is one of her quotes. There are traumatic incidents of violence on a cumulative level that we are holding in our individual and collective bodies. And health doesn't quite cut it, because what I am seeing is a rise of people who are returning to school to become acupuncturists, massage therapists, Reiki masters. And I am surrounded by elders who lived through the HIV and AIDS, choosing to do more healing, integrative work, because they saw the healthcare system was never for or by or about us, nor did it embrace the safety or well-being of those that we lost. So again, it's that reaffirming that this is coming after the AIDS crisis, right? And what, you know, so many people during that time in Kara Page, if you read her story, she talks about, you know, all of her friends that she lost during this time and really cultivating this healing justice movement across the country, responding to what was going on. Okay, so I'm going to play a video, and it's kind of how we looking at healing justice on a larger scale now. It's actually an audio video. And so as you guys listen, again, I'm gonna invite you guys back to the chat room. And I want you guys to listen to the lyrics and you know, comment on what do you hear. And let us know what strikes out to you, what line is got your attention, how you feel about it, and things like that. So we're going to skip to kind of like the present. Maybe this video was done within the last couple of years, this song, and kind of see where healing justice is now. Because healing justice is being used across the spectrum in healing, but remember, it's coming out and birthed out of Black queer persons coming together in community to respond to the HIV AIDS epidemics of the 80s and early 90s. So let's see. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I think I got it. I think I got a formula going. Then I'm gonna start sharing.
I came to heal what you came to do. I came to build what you came to do. I came to chill what you came to do. But if I gotta kill just to make it through, blah, I'ma make sure I make it you. But I said we came to heal what you came to do. But I said we came to build what you came to do. But I said we came to chill what you came to do. But if we gotta kill just to make it through, blah, we gonna make sure we make it you. But I said we all came to heal what they came to do. I said we all came to build what they came to do. I said we all came to chill what they came to do. But if we gotta kill just to make it through, blah, gonna make sure we make it true. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. YOC, we in the building. I said, healing justice is a strategy. Responding to historical tragedy. Now YOC in the building, they gonna be mad at we. Soon as the tip off, the D's pull up slow, we dip off. It's routine, it's street knowledge, but we not here just organizing against a policy. Picture me giving an apology to the people who lied to me, standing on spirit, speaking the prophecy. I went from property to half freed and back to property. Shit is like Monopoly, and it used to be all about the cheddar. Now it's how our lives link all together. We sit in circles and make it better, collectively hurting together. It's old pain, it's new pain. We like no more pain. And ever since we learned about white supremacy, we ain't been the same. I'm talking about the slaves, ships, whips, and the chains. I'm talking about the cuffs, metal detectors, and up north trips, and how family get divorced quick and culture get lost in other wisdom, and how our relationships is filled with ism, and how that trauma be laying beneath the surface. Nah, I don't think you get the purpose. I said, healing justice is a strategy, responding to historical tragedy. Now, YOC in the building, you gonna be mad at we. Holla, it's the report back. We in the building.
Okay.
The fact that I could invest in real estate, someone that had no experience at all, no knowledge, I've done something that I never thought that I could do.
I've never been to an event or a class that has been so jam-packed full of information. I took down like 6 pages.
Okay. So again, feel free to continue to respond in the chat box of your feelings. And I'm going to get this back up and then we can move forward. Okay. So. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go to some of the chat. Okay, so Black, we're sure we're going to make it. Okay. Isms in our relationships. Isms, right? We hear that often. We talk about healing justice, right? As, you know, using stigma as motivation. Yes, responding to historical tragedy. So again, we think about HIV epidemic. We think about HIV now, right? You know, as a historical tragedy, a current tragedy in that way. No more pain. And so I always like that video because when we, again, kind of going back to, right, transphobia and homophobia and where that lands in Black art today, and we think about this concept of healing justice, right, being birthed out of, you know, the AIDS epidemic through, you know, the Black feminist movement and all of these things. And then, you know, you fast forward to now, right, we have these Black hip hop artists that pretty much doesn't align with, you know, maybe, you know, the HIV where, you know, advocacy work or the, you know, the queer advocacy work or just any of those type of things, and see how they're able to, how that line came together. Like, you know, healing justice now can be used in the pain of all isms in that way. So I always think that was very creative. It's a young group. I think they're out in Oakland and they do healing justice music. So it's like this whole album around like healing justice movement. I thought was very dope. So I just always like to use that clip. We have more comments. It's justice. Let me scroll up. Old trauma spoke to me because we are currently learning about trauma-informed care. Yes, you're right. Trauma-informed care, right? An idea of not re-traumatizing people, right? That's huge when we talk about this kind of work, that healing justice work. Justice is a strategy for historical tragedy. Yes. Heal Bill. And so yes, as you guys, you all, healing justice is a strategy. Strategies are so powerful and practical. Yes. And so I just feel like that was another example. If because the healing justice, it can be complicated, like transformative justice, like all the justice, if we really do the work and trying to figure out where we land in that, it's such a broad thing. So I like to find different ways to explain it that maybe I can't explain it, because even when I got into this healing justice movement, I'm like, what is it? It sounds like something I need to be a part of. What is it? And when I ran across that, I felt like that was a really good example of how the youth is responding to this healing justice movement. And so I really wanted to go into another video, but I wanted to, shout out to our organization yesterday. If you guys don't know, we just wrapped up a 4-day festival called the Art Hills Festival. And the Art Hills Festival was a 4-day multidisciplinary virtual art festival that addresses social justice issues and advocates to eliminate HIV and mental health stigma through a healing justice framework. Again, acknowledging social justice issues, right? So we talk about HIV, we talk about mental health. If you're not talking about or addressing those social justice issues, are we getting to the root of the trauma, the root of when we say HIV stigma and HIV prevention? And just a little bit about what the goals of that festival was. We wanted to provide an inclusive and impactful platform that engaged the community around social justice topics through artistic expression. As you guys know, we started off with the Black Lives Matter Declaration. How can we not, right, talk about the injustice, the disparities, just how can we not? We want to explore how art can be used as a mechanism to heal and restore vibrant ways of living. The clip that we just played, right? Like, think of if so many Black and brown queer youth had that same power in their voice, or that same way to create art to make that point, how far, their lives would be. And so that was just a little bit about the Art Hills Festival. Now, I do want to play a video from one of our keynote speakers, Dr. William Mosley, and he kind of brought home a little bit around like the intersection of art and its impact on our community, and just a little bit around healing justice. So it's a short clip. Christopher, I'm gonna try to do it again. I think I got a method. I'm still trying to go. So we're gonna go back in it. And okay, so again, if you guys have any questions, let me know.
Justice. We really have to think about who is in a community and define those boundaries. A lot of folks are being like, boundaries, like, why do I want boundaries? That might be counterintuitive. Well, in fact, we need to determine who is in community with us in order to determine what the process is going to look like. It does have a start and it does have an end. And those of us who are accountable in that community can define and consent to that process. And so, moving forward, I want to ask y'all, what would it look like for you? This is not a self-care process, but rather this is a community-wide process. This is not something that the individual can resolve on their own, but perchance a harm that can be brought to the table of the community. So who would your community be? What would you ask of them? What are you bringing to the community? And if it's hard for you to determine who your community is, maybe think about how you are, in fact, a person who has experienced harm. And maybe think about what that harm was, how it has manifested. And from there, it might be easier to think about the actors and agents at play, perhaps on a systemic level, but also in a very person-to-person level. But anyway, I say that all to say that I want you to carry those questions as we think in terms of art and social justice. One of the most transformative experiences with any budding Black queer in this day and age is to remember that we didn't invent the wheel. That in fact, there is a history that precedes us and we can rely upon. I remember one moment in my personal education, maybe the miseducation of Will Mosley, right? Where I ran into the archives, maybe to think through bell hooks here, right? So she went to therapy because she was hurting, and I went to the archives because I felt missing. And I found letters from an AIDS activist by the name Essex Hemphill, who is known publicly for being a ferociously talented poet, essayist, and friend to other of his contemporaries who were also living and dying from HIV/AIDS related illnesses. Now, on the one hand, I say this to say that art and activism for Black queer folks is tethered to the extent that one cannot see the other. And at the same time, I'm wondering about just what the message is sometimes. Because for me, right, as somebody who is exploring their Blackness and exploring their queerness and the intermingling of the two, that was very important for me. But there are also accounts of Essex Hemphill performing this activism in front of a mixed crowd, which is to say, with white, cisgender, gay men. Essex Hemphill was dying. His family had a tense relationship with that, to the extent that there are rumors about the condition of his archive, right? So he had to go to community, but it was white queer community who could not see him, who turned a blind eye to the specific plight of Black queer pain. And that is all too easy. And maybe I'm preaching to the choir here. But I want us to think about the fact that in the previous video, I had asked you to think about who your community is. And if you perchance had said the queer community, there's a strong and there is a history that is very present, let's just say, in which the racial line is a line drawn in the sand, which prevents certain people from seeing other people. The glory of something like the space that our Heals Festival provides is that it gives us the chance to see and witness art created by folks who might look like me, who might not look like you. And it is your responsibility to see them on their terms. It is your responsibility not to simply consume, but to bear witness. And
okay. So, time's sake, I will stop. But basically, yeah, so Dr. Mosley was one of our keynote speakers in our closing for last night. And he really talks about, again, art and activism and what does that look like and how it's really rooted in a survival of Black queer folks. One moment. Okay, so we're back. So yes, feel free if you had any response to Dr. Mosley and what he was saying about, again, history, right? We hear more and more, we hear that history. We hear about, we know what the injustices are. We know what HIV looked like in the 80s and the 90s and what HIV looks like now. We know as that linear line goes, we also know racism in this world. We know homophobia in this world. We know transphobia in this world. We know ableism in this world. We know discrimination against persons with mental health conditions in this world. So those things are parallel. And art has a way of allowing not just the agents and the people that are experiencing those things, but also for people to consume it. But again, to bear witness, you know, not just to be a consumer, but be able to understand, to be able to figure out what that means in the work that we're doing around HIV prevention and stigma. And so a few of these will go forward more talking about what it is being Black and queer in America. Again, we can't talk about healing justice. We can't talk about HIV prevention and stigma and awareness. And we all know what that is, who are, you know, the most impacted around HIV and AIDS related things. And so being Black and queer in America, right? Like we can say that. We don't have to just say it through HIV stats. We don't have to just say it through HIV prevention flyers and stuff. We can actually acknowledge what it really is along with HIV. The two are not separated. It goes hand in hand. And I feel like that's what the healing justice framework allows for you not to, again, allows you to bear witness to the whole picture. The whole picture. And again, I got some of this stuff up around what it is to be Black and queer in America. We know, again, the first line talks about, you know, African Americans, whether queer or trans, have always been a part of the community. We have James Baldwin, we got Marsha P. Johnson, we got Laverne Cox, we got Jason Collins. We have, you know, openly Black people in art in some form, you know, and who they are in America, who they are in our lives. You know, we talk about cities like DC and Atlanta and Georgia and New York. And then again, I don't even in this presentation focus on the South, but we know what the South is and where Black folks and the disparities and really not even disparities, contributions to the world and what the South has been. We talk about the civil rights, again, history. You know, it was just 100 years ago when we talk about slavery and biases and all of these different things, and that intersection of what it is to be Black, but also, you know, queer and also trans, but also living with the mental health condition. It's important that we really acknowledge those intersectionalities, right, around HIV. And again, economic insecurities, you know, where do Black people or people of color fall? Like, you know, I work with the HIV Planning Council. You know, economic insecurity comes up all the time, right? You want people to worry about taking their medications, but they don't have a place to live. You know, they don't have a home. Like, so when we talk about that in the scope of HIV, but let's talk about it as it really is the scope for Black people in this country. You know, like it's not just, you know, a byproduct of those persons living with HIV. It's a bigger picture. And again, they can go hand in hand and you have to acknowledge it at the same time. It's not one without the other. And again, I have a few stuff up here. I want to keep going to leave room for comments and conversation. And we can go on and on and on around the, you know, the health inequities. And you guys know more than probably I do. So I really did refrain from going too much into HIV health disparity because I know most of you guys on this call know what is going on. You're doing this work because of. So I didn't want to spend the time to talk about HIV inequities because we know, and I know most of you guys know. You know, religious intolerance. When we talk about the South, why are we putting so much emphasis on the South now? We had the South HIV/AIDS Awareness Day come out last year. They celebrated the second year this year. When we talk about the criminal system, the penal system, we talk about religious intolerance, we talk about economic and poverty. Those are the main things when you talk about Black people in the South. Right? Like it goes hand in hand with when we do the HIV work. But when you just talk about being a person of color, those things comes up, you know, like what is the quality of life of a Black queer person in rural Mississippi? You know, what are the access they have to facilities and HIV clinics and all of these things, you know, and these conversations is coming up, and we know that work. But again, we know that work because we're talking about it through an HIV landscape. But can we talk about it through a race landscape? Are we prevented from doing that work, you know? And I just ask these questions. And of course, you know, we talk about violence and harassment, and we talk about the deaths of Black trans women, like every day and week and month. It's like a tally, you know, the 34th, you know, the 35th of 2020, you know, the number, you know, we've become so used to the number going up, right? And reposting and RIP. But again, are we not having these conversations when we talk about HIV? Are we not? And again, I ask the question, why not, right? And we just talk about real quick, like the biggest impact on social oppression. You know, again, social inequities, right? We live in a world now we're online. And so it's not just about not having access to medication, not having a place to live, not being treated right because of the color of your skin. You can log on and get all of this. You can log on and get the social impact, you know. So I just wanted to, I put this together and it's really to give where if you're Black and queer, right, you have, you know, attacks that could attack your Blackness online. You can log in on a computer and you might see something that's attacking your Blackness. Then you might have a Black person attacking your queerness. And if you notice a theme in all of these tweets, they're all what you call that verified. They're all verified. So these are people who are supposed to have impact or influence on our society. And if you read the tweets, it could be some of your faves that are impacting. And we talk about trauma-informed care and re-traumatizing, right? We already know the stats around what it is to be Black queer in America. But my God, I can log onto Twitter and be reminded constantly over and over again. So when we talk about these things, are we thinking about the whole landscape, not just health disparities, but what do our social life look like? What are the social impacts that are impacting us the most? Then again, and more examples of triggers and traumas and re-traumatizing and how we live in a non-trauma informed care world, right? And we don't have to get into the Justice Smollett thing. We know that, you know, a lot of we know where that went, and a lot of people have different opinions about that. So we're gonna really just brush past that. I did that, you know, before he, you know, y'all know the story. So again, you know, so this, the Human Rights Campaign Foundation did a survey in 2007, and mind you, I'm just trying to paint a historical, you know, a lineage, a line, a historical line of where we at. So this is what, so 13 years ago, right? And look at some of the comments that was sent in, you know, Black, female, bisexual, lower class, middle, add that up. They said they would elect a new president, and they wanted to send the president something, how they felt. You know, I am HIV positive and ready for a cure. I'm a 19-year-old bisexual Latino, and I deserve to be protected under the law and have equal rights as any other American. I survived racism and sexism in the military and only be subjected to be poor standard of the service at the VA and its medical services. So here we got 13 years ago, right? These comments could be given to the next president. You know, like it's almost like you can take the date and it's the same thing. So again, follow me when we talk about the Harlem Renaissance, and we talk about the civil rights era, we talk about the movement in the AIDS crisis, and then we talk about here 2007 and 8, and think about where we are in 2020. This is not something we can ignore in our work. And I'm working with another mental health activist here in Austin, Fabian Woods of the Deep Wood Foundation. We came together around this idea of social depression, right? Social depression is the mental immobility of a person caused by generational social inequality. Factors such as gender inequality, racial inequality, being born into poverty, being a part of the queer community causes individuals to mentally stop themselves from the pursuit of happiness, mental fatigue. I kept this in this presentation because we talk about HIV stigma. HIV stigma. We have PrEP, we have PEP. Why do we still lose, Black and brown youth, right? We have U equals U. Why are we still losing lives? Why are the rates are just stagnant and in some places going down and other places going up? Why? Right? And we talk about HIV stigma, even though this is more of a mental terminology, a mental health terminology, I feel like it really correlated to HIV stigma, like because of the historical traumas of Black and brown queer people, we are at a point that some of us are just socially depressed, and that's really something to think about in the work that we're doing, right? Like, how do you get persons to take their medications every day when they, generationally, they've been through what they've been through? And so how do we just put a name on it? What is social depression? That's a name, but I feel like it was very important to bring this up in our work. It's like, well, how can we work around social depression? And I think that's a really good way to segue into this idea of HIV stigma, and that. And so again, I didn't want to go into HIV stats with you guys. I knew who this presentation was for. You guys can probably give me more data than I have the time to look at. But again, we know there's disparities of HIV amongst African American. It's as a Black person living with HIV and coming out at the age of 14, I don't think I've ever heard anything else but HIV was a Black male's disease. And so that's my whole life. And so again, we know that stats. But how can we overcome? And again, we talked about it, right? What is a healing practice space? Modeling our work around acknowledging the isms of the world. We have to start by listening. We have to start honoring people's experiences. If you're talking to a Black, queer, or trans person, you have to acknowledge what that means. We can't no longer want to do the work around HIV and not acknowledge the agents, the people, the community that most impacted, and the things that led up to the work that we're doing around HIV, so we have to listen. We have to be committed to people of color and be an ally and build on healing justice work in communities, in our clinics. If we're having these clinics, what are we doing to acknowledge like Black Lives Matter, or acknowledge when, a bill, Trump passes a bill that takes away some of our rights, right? Like, those are things that can't be ignored if we really want to continue to move forward and combating HIV stigma. Because I think that's where I land in this work. Of course, being in the clinic, I do the others, but I think stigma is a priority for me on a personal note. We have to work through an anti-oppression framework that seeks to transform and heal, and just heal, right? And we can go on and on and on, but basically acknowledging the communities that we are trying to impact and trying to help and doing the work. We have to acknowledge and then start movement building. We talk about the Harlem Renaissance, right? That was a community, that was a movement building. We talk about the archives that we have out of the AIDS epidemic, they had to survive. If they didn't come together and create communities across this country, even in HIV prevention, we think about the history of that, and we think about Stonewall, and we think about, LGBT rights. It's always birthed out of community. It's always birthed out of a movement. So it's almost, the history has proven that's what real change happens, through a systematic movement. And so I have one more last video, and this video I want to play, it just kind of brings home like how art can heal persons living with HIV. Danye, our love, I produced his play last year here in Austin. He's out of New York, Philly, but he's a revered playwright living with HIV that does that work. And I just think it's just a good example of you know, how you can use art to heal at the intersex of HIV, whether with it, or whether it's idea around prevention. That'll be my last video. Then we can open it up for questions. I know we are. Oh well, I don't know. I don't know if we have time for the video.
How long
Let
is
me
it?
know, Chris. We can open it up for questions, and I can just keep this link. I think it's like 5 minutes, 7 minutes.
Yeah, let's send the video with the link with the recording that we'll send out for folks to look at on their own. But let's go ahead and open it up for any questions or comments as we're closing in on our time today.
Oh, I didn't mean to go back.
And it looks like, Tarik, if you could go back to that slide before this one, if you'd like to kind of just share.
I think it gotta make me stop share to open it back up. Hold on. Stop share and bring it up.
While you're doing that, I do want to point out, I think one of the main messages that I got from this presentation so far with the concept of healing justice and understanding the importance of being able to address historical trauma. And I think that seems like it's a very important piece when we're trying to find ways to move forward, is that historically we've often placed a Band-Aid over different traumatic events. We try to address the immediate outcome of what's going on and ignore what the root cause of those traumatic instances are. And so actually being able to identify what are the root causes of those traumatic incidences, and how can we take that historical trauma and learn from it so that it doesn't happen again. And I think that's one of the messages that I got from what we've seen so far today. But yeah, I thought this slide looks really, really interesting. We want to take a few moments to go through this.
Yeah, I mean, and just to bring it home for the last few minutes, you know, awareness, you know, recognize that racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia does exist. It's not at the fault of your own. There's a power in the awareness. There's a power of acknowledging what's going on in the world, what's going on in the community that we're trying to do the work in. Recognize that our experiences of inequality and discrimination causes trauma within us. What we consider as normal has a dormant effect on us wholly. Triggers are what keeps the cycle of social oppression alive. And recognize that there's a need to create tools and coping skills to endure social influences. Art is an incredible tool. You never know when you need them to fall a victim to social depressions, i.e., you know, if we frame that around HIV stigma, right, and or mental health stigma in that. And so again, healing justice allowed that community effort to do those things.
Thank you so much, Tarik. There hasn't been any questions in the chat. We have come up on our time, so I want to be respectful of your time. I want to thank you all for joining us. So if you do have any questions from the presentation, feel free to email me personally. I'll send out kind of the recording and the notes from this presentation. And then any questions that we get, I'll work with Tarik to make sure that we can get an answer so we can include that in our update as well. Tarik, can you type in the chat what your contact information is, or if you have a slide that has that so folks can reach out to you?
Yes.
Perfect. And so this is how you can reach Tarik and learn more about his organization, What's in the Mirror. Again, Catherine shared a blog post that Tarik wrote for Achieving Together earlier this year that you can check out and learn more information about the organization as well. And I'll include a link to that in the notes that I send out. So thank you so much, Tarik, for taking the time to explore this concept with us. I really appreciate all of the information you've shared. And thank you all for joining us on this Monday. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great start to your week.
Thank you, guys. And y'all have a great day, and make sure you guys taking care of yourselves.
Yes.
Thank you.